my name is Professor Rad, and in this video we're going to continue our conversation of rounding by looking at 3 special place values for decimal numbers. So some special place values when rounding. If you're rounding to the nearest whole amount, what that means is you're rounding to the nearest whole number. So you're trying to get rid of any decimal part. So rounding to the nearest whole amount means rounding to the ones place, since that's like the last digit to make up a whole number is in the ones place. So be careful, whole amount doesn't mean you just write out the whole number. We're not using whole in the sense of like entire. We're using whole in the sense of whole number or natural number, that sort of idea. If you're rounding to the nearest dollar, that also means rounding to the nearest ones place. So this means if you have a dollar sign like I do here, rounding to the nearest dollar would mean rounding to the nearest ones place. Rounding to the nearest cent means that we're going to round to the nearest hundredths place. The reason we're doing this is because 1 cent, there are 100 cents that make up a dollar. So 1 cent is 1/100th of a dollar. So also I should comment that this means that the denomination sign we're using is the dollar sign. If you have a cent sign, that means you're going to round to the nearest ones place, but I'm not going to do anything tricky like that. So let's work through some of these examples. So for part A, it says we're going to round this number to the nearest cent. So to the nearest cent means rounding to the nearest hundredths. So we need to identify where's the hundredths place and underline it before we do anything else. So to identify the hundredths place, we have to figure out where is the ones place. So the ones place is immediately to the left of the decimal point. So the 4 here is in the ones place, and we need to find the hundredths. So we have tenth, and then the 2 is in the hundredths. So I'm going to underline the 2 being in the hundredths place. Then we follow our rounding rules like normal. So I look to the right, it's smaller than 5, so that means I'm going to keep this 2. I keep everything to the left, so I'm going to keep the 7 and the 54. I also want to make sure I'm including my dollar sign label. And then everything to the right turns into a 0. Then I'm going to get rid of any unnecessary zeros. So in this case, both of these zeros are going to be unnecessary because they're to the right-hand side of the decimal point. And this 0 is unnecessary because it's at the end. And now this 0 is at the end to the right of the decimal, so it is unnecessary. So when I round 54.7236 to the nearest cent, I'm going to get $54.72. When you round to the nearest cent, it's like how you normally see money, right? You usually see money written with 2 places after the decimal point, again, because we want to the nearest hundredth, because there are 100 pennies to a dollar. All right, so for this next one, we're going to round this number to the nearest whole amount. So the nearest whole amount is going to mean to the ones place. As you recall, the ones place is immediately to the left of the decimal point. So here's our decimal point, and immediately to the left of it is a 9. So 9s are tricky because when a 9 rounds up, then we get a chain reaction, right? But in this case, we have good news because immediately to the right is a 2, and a 2 is a small number. So that means we get to keep the 9. We're going to keep everything to the left of the 9. And then everything to the right, bring down my decimal point, everything to the right becomes a 0. And now we get rid of any unnecessary zeros. So this 0 is to the right of a decimal point, and it's all the way on the end, so we don't need it. And then same thing with this 0 is not necessary either. So once we get rid of everything that's after a decimal point, we can get rid of the decimal point. So a good check that you can do is when you're rounding to the nearest whole amount, you should get a whole number in the end. In other words, you shouldn't have any decimal point or any decimal place value because whole amount means whole number. Okay, so there's no decimal component at the end. And lastly, we're going to round, this big number to the nearest dollar. So rounding to the nearest dollar means once again, we're going to round to the nearest ones place. So this one's a little bit tricky because we've got a bunch of symbols here, and that can be a little overwhelming. So I've got to be really careful, make sure I'm looking for the decimal point to find the ones place. So we've got some commas. Here's our decimal point. So immediately to the left of the decimal point is our ones place. So this is where we're going to be rounding to. I look immediately to the right. It's 5 or bigger, which means we have to round up. So this 1 is going to turn into a 2. I keep everything to the left. So all of these digits are going to stay, as well as the dollar sign. And then everything to the right, including the decimal point, well, I'm going to write down the decimal point, and then everything to the right turns into a 0. So then we have to get rid of any unnecessary zeros we don't need. So this 0 is to the right of a decimal point, and it's the last digit, so we don't need it. Same thing with this 0 now. It's all the way on the end, and it's to the right of the decimal point, so we don't need it. And we got rid of everything on the right-hand side of the decimal point, so we can get rid of that. Now, I do notice that there's still a 0 here, but this 0 is necessary because it's on the left-hand side of where the decimal point was. So we can't get rid of that 0, we need it. So rounding this number to the nearest dollar looks like we ended up with $2,035,672, which is not a bill I would like to pay. It would be a sum that, I'd like to win, but not to pay. So as with rounding to the nearest whole amount, when you round to the nearest dollar, there should be no decimal points left. Okay, so nothing on the right-hand side of the decimal point. Whereas when you round to the nearest cent, it should be like how we typically see money written, with 2 digits after the decimal point. So that's where we're going to wrap up this video. I do believe that there's, and now you try to practice rounding to just regular place values, but also to these special place values. So you can work through those now you try questions, and the answers will be in the description box below. So I hope this helped with rounding, especially with the money, and I will see you in the next one. In the meantime, have a wonderful day, and bye for now.